Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us. Thank you so much for being with us this evening here in the States, but for wherever you're joining us. My name is Alexandra Dempsey, and I am the CEO of the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session of our last Navigate with Care webinar for the entire series called Reefs Are Nature's Ally. So this webinar series is hosted by the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation in partnership with the International Foundation for AIDS to Navigation, or IFAN. And together we're working to raise awareness about how reefs and responsible navigation can protect the very ecosystems that protect us, our coral reefs, our mangrove forests, and seagrass meadows. Today's discussion focuses on the incredible ways these three ecosystems serve as nature's ally: buffering coastlines from storms, sustaining fisheries, supporting tourism, and maintaining healthy waters that benefit both people and the planet. We'll also explore what happens when these ecosystems are degraded and how mariners, boaters, conservationists, and policymakers can work together to safeguard them. You'll be hearing from our outstanding panel of experts today, all the way from the Caribbean to the Pacific, who will share their experiences and perspectives on the ecological and economic value of reefs, mangroves, and seagrass meadows, and how we can better integrate conservation and navigation. As we talk about protecting these vital ecosystems, I want to emphasize that navigating safely around coral reefs and other sensitive habitats don't just protect the environment, it also improves safety for mariners. Healthy reefs act as natural breakwaters, reducing wave energy and helping stabilize coastlines, while good navigation practices prevent vessel damages, groundings, and accidents. Simply put, when we protect nature, we protect ourselves. And with that, we'll be covering kind of three main topics today: the essential role of coral reefs and other habitats in supporting coastal communities and maritime safety, the real world challenges that ecosystems face from boating, development, and climate change, and lastly, the collaborative steps through education, technology, and policy that can help mariners navigate with care. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce our very distinguished panelists. First, we have Dr. Ian McLeod, adjunct professor at James Cook University. We have Dr. Krista Sherman, a senior scientist at the Perry Institute for Marine Science. Dr. Juliet Carissa, senior research scientist at the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. And lastly, Mr. Terry Neville, director of the Solomon Islands Maritime Authority. We are very honored to have each of you here with us today and to share your expertise and insights. So with that, let's begin with Dr. Ian McLeod, who will open with an overview of coral reef ecosystems and the many services they provide to both people and nature. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thanks, Alex. Tanakwa, everyone. Good morning from New Zealand, where I am today. Really happy to have this opportunity to talk about one of my absolute favorite ecosystems of the world, built from corals. So corals are amazing animals. They start out with very small polyps or little individual animals, which live in a partnership with a symbiotic dinoflagellate or algae that photosynthesizes and provides those polyps energy. Each of those polyps creates a skeleton made out of calcium carbonate. And as those polyps divide and grow, they then create colonies, such as some of the ones you can see on the top right of the screen. And these come in an absolute myriad of forms: pillars, fans, plates, branching. And together, those colonies can form really large reefs. I've spent the majority of my career working on the Great Barrier Reef. And that reef system is so large, in fact, it's the size of Italy, that it can be seen from space. So these are absolutely essential ecosystem throughout the tropics. And they're also one of the most biodiverse ecosystems. If you mind going to the next slide. So although coral reefs only cover 1% of sea, the ocean area, they actually support 25% of all ocean species and life. So because of this variety of habitats that they form, and because many of them live in these shallow energy, high energy areas where they can use those symbiotic algae to help drive the system and provide the energy to provide the system. They, there's just thousands and thousands. In fact, over 4,000 species of fish are supported by coral reefs. But it's not just fish. There's everything from snails and clams and turtles and sharks, and it's just a kaleidoscope of colors. I'm someone who really loves to observe nature, and you're never going to have a better experience observing nature than under the water in a coral reef, because generally on land, lots of things are scared of you and they'll leave. But underwater, generally everything's just doing its own thing. So you can really enjoy nature in abundance, with so many different colors and so many variety of shapes. And generally it's going to ignore you and just do its own thing. And so it's an absolute privilege to spend some time with coral reefs. But they're not just biodiverse, they also have a lot of other ecosystem services or benefits that they provide for society. Next one, I think, is, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So these coral reefs, particularly through their support of these fish species, they provide food security and a protein source for hundreds of millions of people throughout the tropics. And this is really important for supporting livelihoods, not just through economic benefits, but also through protein. So there's again, like hundreds of people, millions of people around the world that rely on the fish and other protein derived from coral reefs to keep them healthy. So this is an example of a small fisher's haul in the Philippines for the day, and that's gonna keep a whole family healthy for another couple of days. Okay, if you go to the next slide. Coral reefs also support livelihoods through business, and an example for the Great Barrier Reef, again, it's really big business. So there was a study done by Deloitte a few years ago, and it actually showed that the Great Barrier Reef brought in $6.4 billion every year, and Australian dollars, or around $4 billion in US dollars per year. And a lot of that came through tourism, and that supported over 60,000 jobs ongoing. And this is a really, a sustainable, renewable resource. It's not something that you're mining. This can keep going year on year if you keep your these ecosystems healthy. And it's the same story around the world, and also for a lot of developing nations. This is a way for to bring in a sustainable income through tourism that is done. If it's done the right way, then it's non-extractive. You're going to be able to continue to do that forever, and it brings those like income and foreign income dollars to some really remote areas, and sometimes it's their best bet for development. If you go on to the next slide. As Alex mentioned as well, they also play a really important role in protecting our coast and our coastal infrastructure. So some recent studies have shown that some reefs can dissipate or break up over 90% of the energy from waves and extreme weather. They also form a role in creating beaches. So for example, parrotfish are a type of fish that will often feed on coral, and when that gets broken up through their digestion and comes out through their system, that's actually part of what creates these beautiful sandy beaches that we really love in the tropics. So, and this is becoming more and more important, particularly this coastal protection, as we get the effects of climate change, more extreme weather, increasing the ocean sea level is rising, and so the ability of coral reefs to repair themselves and rebuild and accrete is a way of having, continue to protect our coasts. And then if we just pop along to the last slide, the other real amazing value for them is they're just sheer beauty, and how much wonder and exploration and enjoyment. I know a lot of people on this call are mariners, and have had the chance to sail, boat, ship through, dive, snorkel, paddle on top of and around coral reefs, and I'm sure they'll agree as well that just the sheer beauty of coral reefs is absolutely one of the wonders of the world. So I think that really has a value in itself. So thanks for that chance to give a brief introduction about coral reefs.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ian. And it really highlights all the different, not only ecosystem services that these incredible ecosystems provide in terms of shelter, habitat, nursing grounds, etc. They also are incredibly important to people, and especially coastal communities. Not only is acting as a barrier from these, insipid storms that keep getting stronger and stronger, but also are able to, provide a home and a host for a lot of the protein that millions of people really rely on around the world. Thank you so much, Ian. And we'll come back to you with some other questions. Thank you. Krista, as a fisheries scientist working closely, with coastal communities, could you share how healthy coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrasses directly support food security and local livelihoods, between either fisheries or tourism? And from your experience in the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean, what changes have you seen when these ecosystems are degraded, and what approaches are proving most effective in helping communities restore and sustain them? As we really, really explore what it means to navigate with care, how can boating and maritime communities become stronger allies in protecting these habitats that in turn protect us? Thank you so much, Krista.
Thanks, Alex, for that question. I think Ian did a really good job in answering the first part of that question and highlighting some of the values that reef ecosystems provide, not just here in the Bahamas and throughout the Caribbean region, but all throughout the world. So for us as a small coastal nation, it's definitely integral to supporting tourism, which is the #1 industry, providing livelihoods for thousands of fishers, food security for everyone that does consume seafood, especially in times where we may be cut off, like in COVID-19 when there are shipping crises. So a really important part of that aspect and nutrition. But I will say I've been in the water diving since I was a teenager, in the water since I was a baby, love it, obsessed about it. But the most dramatic changes I've seen to our coastal ecosystems have really occurred in the last 5 to 6 years. The first one linked to climate change, which is something that came up, happened with Hurricane Dorian in 2019. And so that was a really powerful Category 5 storm, and we know we're likely to experience more of those in the future as climate change progresses. But that definitely had a huge impact on some of the reefs around Abaco and Grand Bahama, where the hurricane directly impacted. So loss in structural complexity. We had structural damage to reefs. We had temporary bleaching because water temperatures were a lot cooler. So a lot of impacts there that I'd never expected to see before, in addition to some of the household and yard items that you don't normally see on reefs, having those being on reefs. Not usual to see a lawnmower next to a fish, for example. So those are some definite impacts. The other thing that's happened is shortly after that, we had the introduction of stony coral tissue loss disease. It's really aggressive and it kills a lot of the corals that are really important for building up the framework and that complexity of reefs, providing habitat for reef-associated species. And that's definitely changed the seascape dramatically. It's really fast acting and spreading, and it's impacted most of the hard corals that we do have here in the Bahamas with really high mortality rates. So in some instances, species that were really common on reefs, we're not seeing those as much anymore. And species that were naturally rare, like pillar corals, there is concern and risk that we could have local extinctions and regional extinctions of some species there. And bleaching, again, associated with climate change is something that we're seeing more of, and it's more severe and impacted. So 2023 was quite striking, impacting not only hard corals, but some of the soft corals here as well. So these are some of the changes that we're seeing, but the good news is there are things that we can do as a science-based organization. Trying to incorporate that into our restoration techniques has been really powerful in helping us prioritize where we go about treating, how we can scale that up, and working with governments and communities to do that. So there are a couple of initiatives that we've launched at the Perry Institute for Marine Science. So the Bahamas Mangrove Alliance to help restore some of the mangroves that were impacted during Dorian. We have a Reef Rescue Network program that involves NGOs, government, private partners, and using that to help scale up our restoration efforts and get involved businesses and tour operators as a part of that process as well. And then recently launching the Coral Gene Bank. So species that appear to be resilient to this disease, what can we learn more about them? What other treatments may be effective, and how can we use that to inform restoration moving forward? Because they're things that may come up in the future. So these are just some of the things that we can do and have been doing with partners, including boaters, that help to report sightings of disease, for example, and bleaching outbreaks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Krista. No, I two points there. I really appreciate you pointing out that, coral reefs, specifically are under, many a two-punch combo, if you will, that not only is, the ocean warming, that's causing more severe storms. It's causing the explosion of diseases that scientists are still racking their brain about, the pathogens, et cetera. But not only that, it's the people that are out there and are able to enjoy, the reefs and the mangroves and the seagrasses that are able to report back. And so that's one thing that, navigating with care is not only making sure you don't, run into a reef or a seagrass bed, but being aware of the surroundings, and that perhaps there is something, ecological happening, and that's amazing. Thank you so much for that input. Juliet, it's so nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm well, Alex.
Well,
Thanks.
amazing. So I had the pleasure of snorkeling on one of Juliet's reefs in Mombasa about, I think, 2 years ago, and she's been an amazing supporter of not only conservationship for coral reefs but also for coastal communities. So Juliet, in many parts of the world, coastal communities are not only restoring reefs, right? And maybe even mangroves and seagrasses, but they're redefining what it means to navigate with care by linking ocean stewardship and, with everyday practices on the water, which of course, that's what occurs in a lot of these, populated areas. Can you share some examples from Kenya or even just East Africa at large, where local initiatives have successfully combined, ecosystem restoration with responsible resource use, or safer navigation of the waters? And if you could, what measurable benefits these efforts have brought to both people and nature? Thank you so much, Juliet.
So thank you, Alex, for that. So most of the marinas here, I would say it's the small scale, mostly fishermen, the small boat tourism operators, and also some patrol boats. And yeah, so one of the ways that we've been trying to motivate community to conserve their resource is through community-led conservation areas. And so we have local coastal communities secluding areas to protect them, like a no-take zone, but at the local level. And these have been very beneficial because it has instilled stewardship from the people themselves, because they are in control of what they do there. They decide what to do and what not to do. And there's an example in Kenya where one of these locally managed areas, they have had a very successful tourism operations happening. And with tourism comes a lot of activities in an area. And one of those are the boats that operate within that area. So we've seen more and more that the local communities are taking initiatives to ensure that the tourism activities happen there, but in a very responsible way. So we find that they put like buoys to ensure that they anchor their boats without having to drop the anchor down. They have those buoys, and also in a centralized place. So boats are not moving like everywhere. They have like centralized places where all boats go there. They rope themselves on the buoy, and the tourists go and swim to where they want to see the fish, the corals. But not only the physical damage do these boats cause sometimes here, we also have the activities that happen within the boats. They have picnics, sometimes they bring plastics, they throw them off the boat. And we have seen that the communities are taking very good measures to ensure that none of those activities happen. There was a time I was in one of those boats. I was going to do my research, but they hosted me to go for free. So there was one tourist who threw a plastic bottle off the boat, and there are all these rules that don't do this, don't do that, but some people either they don't recognize or maybe they're just ignorant. So one tourist threw a bottle off the boat, and one of the community people inside the boat dove into the water, picked it up, and came back. So that really made me feel very good about the efforts that are happening currently by the people themselves, because they're the ones who live there all the time. For us, we just go maybe occasionally to do research and come back, but you can see clearly that they're taking great care of that. And I will say that this is a very special example for me, because the proceeds that it brings to the people, it was immense. There is a national marine protected area nearby, which is a little bit offshore, and the community area is inshore. And the people started to go to the community area and not to the government protected area, because it's offshore, it's costly, you have to pay more fee to get there, and they will prefer the nearshore area. And you will clearly see that they had already started some fights with the government, like you're taking our tourists, you're taking our revenue, but in the end, all this, you have to do the allyship. So at some point they had some collaboration that, okay, we'll take these kind of tourists and you take this kind of tourists who can pay off. So there's also that kind of arrangement that there's no conflict in that space as well, especially if it's community and government, it's a very sensitive relationship. So yeah, I would say that's one of my best examples that I would share.
I mean, that's fabulous, Julia. And I think that is definitely, that harmony of reaching across the aisle, right, between the community and tourism, where both are being, benefited from these incredible ecosystems. And and it highlights how, when there is stakeholder engagement and stewardship from local communities and engagement, that they will have behavior changes. And that's really, really important to highlight. And I hope that, not only the coral reef community, but other, marine communities are able to highlight some of those behavior change, because sometimes that's very difficult to capture. But thank you so much for that. Thank you. We'll come back with some more questions, I guarantee.
All right.
Terry Neville, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Terry, as someone who's leading maritime governance in the Solomon Islands, you're uniquely positioned, kind of at this intersection or straddle between, ecosystem, ocean management, navigation safety, and community development, right? So how do healthy, coral reefs and mangroves and seagrasses contribute to safer, more sustainable maritime operations, and what steps, specifically in the Solomon Islands, are taken to ensure that navigation and conservation go hand in hand? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond to your questions and participate in this seminar. So maybe just I'd like to start with just about Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands,
Please,
it's a small island developing states. It's a least developed country. We have 1.6 million square kilometers of EEZ. So no, the ocean is our territory, and so the population is growing. At the moment, we are 750,000. The projection are 1 million in 2030 and 1.3 million in 2050. So the population is growing, and so we have all features. We have lagoons, we have forests, we have reefs, we have low-lying atolls, and we have also exports. We export tuna. We have logging and mining industries in Solomon Islands. So we have a lot of competing demand on the ocean, but we really see the ocean as our territory. And by the way, it's something that joined the vision at the regional level, because the Pacific Ocean, you may know that we call it the blue Pacific continent. So for us, the ocean is our territory. So practically what we do we have a national ocean policy in Solomon Islands. And so the government established what we call the Ocean 12. So the 12 ministries working together to try to coordinate and, as you said, balance the economic growth versus nature conservation, and how we manage all of this. So lately we have discussed an ocean flagship program where we really want to coordinate and engage with community on the ground, improve the ocean governance in Solomon Islands, with something we've been working. We really want to focus on ocean science in Solomon Islands. It's something that we lack. We lack the science here in Solomon Islands, focused on Solomon Islands. So it's something that we want to do, and we also want to work more with the communities and on conservation. So it's something that at the Ocean 12, between the 12 ministries, even with conflicted demands we have on the ocean, we try to coordinate and balance economic growth, as I said, and nature conservation. More specifically for the Maritime Authority, so the Maritime Authority, it's a regulator. So it's not our usual activities to engage with communities. But here, since we have the Ocean 12 initiative, is something that we have done more and more. So of course, we have our technical work where we work on hydrography. So we put a lot of resources to build our capacity to conduct hydrographic surveys, to know our ocean, to know the seabed, and also to install H2 navigation. So it's a lot of resources, because it's pretty expensive when we see our sea areas, and for developing countries to mobilize those resources, and we need partners for that to help us. But we really focus on hydrography and H2 navigation, and we engage with communities. So we have community workshops where we talk about safety at sea, we talk about pollution prevention, small boating. So we engage with the skipper of these small boats, because here small boating is a professional activities. It's for fishing, but it's for also carrying cargo and people between islands where we don't have domestic shipping. So we really need to engage more and more with the communities, and hopefully we'll find. So we are calling some partners to help us with our Ocean Flagship program, and to support us in engaging with communities. It's really something that we want to do. So this is community engagement, but also the technical part of it. So for the Maritime Authority, it's of course hydrography and H2 navigation, and build hydrography as an ocean science in Solomon Islands. It's something that is now a priority for the government, and we really want to advance. So I hope that I was able to clarify with practical example how we balance all of these conflicted demands over the ocean. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Eric. And I think I've heard from several other of our partners who have either been panelists here from Fiji, or from other Bahrain and some other areas that are really, again, reaching across the aisle between policy and government with scientists and hydrographers and experts in ATONs, which, aids to navigation, these types of things. So, it really is a very important group effort, or group project rather, to ensure that, not only are the boaters, the mariners, the folks that are accessing the water, are not only safe, but the ecosystems that either they're enjoying or fishing on, et cetera, or navigating around are safe. So thank you so much for that theory. Let's see here. I'm gonna circle back around here. Ian, from an ecological standpoint, what indicators do you look for to assess the health or decline of, particularly coral reef ecosystems? And do you see a lot of those, what's the word, kind of decline or kind of, I don't want to say outputs, but kind of the anchor damage, that type, reef groundings, that type of thing. Can you, other than those that are very, very prevalent in terms of, what would disrupt a coral reef ecosystem, what other indications have you, seen that kind of, that you use to assess the health or decline of a reef system?
Oh, sure. Thank you. That's a really great question. So there's a whole range of technology that we use to investigate coral reefs. But if we're looking at a global scale, because different places use different techniques and have different amounts of resources, the general indicators we use, or the sort of universal metrics we use to assess coral reef health, tend to go towards coral cover. So if you can see the background behind me, that means how much of the substrate is covered by coral, and that's Breuer's Reef on the Great Barrier Reef on a good year, and that's probably around 80% coral cover there. That's a really healthy coral reef. Another big indicator is, particularly in inshore areas, is the amount of macroalgae, because often when coral reefs bleach and die or damage in other ways, they're outcompeted by macroalgae. A really important indicator linked to the food security and business opportunities that are provided by coral reefs is fish biomass and fisheries. So that's another really common way that we assess the health of coral reefs. The second part of your question was around, what have we been observing over the last decades? Look, you can't escape the fact that coral reefs are in trouble. The main driver of the decline is climate change. And because that's a worldwide problem, it can feel a little bit overwhelming in terms of, what can we do? We all know we can make changes in our own lives and also push for, reductions in greenhouse gases. But the individual actions we take on the water are also really important. And that's why I'm so excited to present to this group of mariners, people that love the ocean, people that are involved in the management of the ocean, because something as simple as anchor damage can actually wipe out a whole reef. You can really love a reef to death. I've seen underwater anchor scars that just drag, wipe out a whole line of colonies, or circles created by chains, which are then snagging and breaking. And just being very careful with the basics of navigation, staying in your lane, following the rules, being really mindful. I love the title of this as well, Navigate with Care. I think that really encapsulates something that we can all do, because we all care about the natural environment, and just taking that extra thought and care can make a big difference. I hope that answers the question. I could talk about this for forever, so I don't want to take up too much time.
No. Thank you so much, Ian. And it is so important because, these are the same, we had a previous webinar that really highlighted, a lot of the potential harm that boaters can cause these amazing ecosystems, and that being, anchor scars, propeller scars, what Juliet said about, paper waste, plastic waste, etc. And I think, with that, it's really important to highlight that, it's not only navigating with care, but, make sure you don't, what's on board stays on board until you get to shore. And I think that's really important. And I think so for Krista, I have, you know, that really translates well into the next question for you. How can better awareness among boaters translate into tangible conservation outcomes for coral reefs, seagrasses, mangroves, etc.? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Well, people don't know what's happening or the value. I think it's hard for them to understand why they should be doing something. So I think we need to help make it more explicit, more concrete, the connections that we have as communities living in coastal nations to the environment, so that people want to do what they can. And so I think that's an important first step. And for boaters, that are on the water or thinking about getting on the water, if you're going somewhere you're not familiar with that area, use that opportunity to hire a local guide and support someone in the community. Definitely follow those navigation markers. That'll keep you safe and out of trouble and from harming the environment for sure. But another thing you can do is just make sure you're inspecting the vessel that you're on before you get out to make sure there's nothing leaking, there's nothing broken. Using the appropriate chemicals to disinfect gear, bilge water, discharge ballast water for large ships, and make sure that's happening offshore to make sure you're not introducing diseases or invasive species into an ecosystem. So those are all, I think, simple things that people can do to help protect the environment. And I think we're opportunities like this to have the discussion with people that are not necessarily in your space and to share information and to answer questions that they may have, I think are really going to be important. And there are lots of platforms and channels to be able to do that moving forward. So just making sure people are aware and the value, I think, are really critical.
Amazing. No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Krista. I really think, you know, knowledge is power here, right? So to knowing, you know, even if it's an orange peel or banana peel, something you think is able to be, you know, biodegradable, still leaves a footprint. And I think it's important that, you know, anything from something that seems so mundane as that to ensuring that you're not spilling motor oil or engine oil, etc. These are all very, very important things. So thank you. Juliet, you know, looking ahead, and this may be a little bit of a different question, but looking ahead, what innovative and community-driven approaches are showing the most promise for restoring, you know, coral reef ecosystems while maintaining sustainable livelihoods? So how are you able to balance, you know, protect but still, you know, enable tourism or development to occur so they're in harmony or in unison? I know you touched on that a little bit before, but I would love for you to expand on it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alex. So I think when it comes to innovative processes that are happening in especially our region right now, I will focus more on the tourism and also on the carbon trading. So we have for mostly for coral reefs and also mangroves, we have these ecotourism activities happening. I mentioned about the community conservation areas where tourists are going to are visiting those places and contributing a lot of revenue to the coastal communities. We also have in the mangroves, most of the places that community have decided to isolate for conservation, they put things like boardwalks, so people can go there, have those nature walks in there and pay good money. And also we are recently they have been doing aquaculture activities within the mangroves, so putting like cages that can farm mangroves naturally. And so those are kind of emerging ways that people are saving, conserving nature, but getting a lot of revenue from them. I think one of the challenges that we find with these kind of activities is the space is open access. So everybody has a stake in terms of using it badly, but also in terms of the revenue when they come in, who gets to benefit from this? It's a community space. So how do you split up those benefits? So for us, what's happening in Kenya is those kind of resources go direct to community activities. For example, hospital bills, people can go to hospital and their bills are taken care of, for example, from the carbon credits that they have earned from that community area. Some are taking the money to schools to pay fees for those kids from that community, or maybe buy school uniform or stationery. So we found it's not something that individually people benefit, but it benefits them as a community. And that has so much meaning because everybody is, is part of the benefit chain, if I may call it. Yeah. So I think that's very powerful for us. It might not look like innovation when people talk of innovation, they feel, something catchy, something, but it's very simple ways, but there's a lot of benefits that come from them, but also build a lot of stewardship because people now see the importance of these resources. And if you get into those areas, as I mentioned earlier, if you get into those areas and do like irresponsible things, they really get mad about it. So I think it's building very strong stewardship to the ecosystems.
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Julia, for your comments. And I think, the tragedy of the commons, right, is where if it's open access, that everybody's able to access it, but also not, participate or have activities in these areas with a lot of, due diligence towards, what's best for the ecosystem or for nature. But also, the program you described gives a tangible value to protecting nature. And I think that's really, really important. That's fantastic. And I look forward to also hear more about that, from your team and from you, but also, from other areas, around the world, from the Caribbean to the Pacific on, how communities are able to, physically see the benefits of coral reefs, especially when it comes to protecting them. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So Thierry, you mentioned that, integrating ocean governance and local stewardship is incredibly important in the Solomon Islands. If you don't mind, could you give us, what lessons or best practices from your region, specifically the Solomon Islands, could be applied more broadly, across the Pacific, to strengthen both maritime safety, as well as ecosystem protection? Oh,
Thank you. So just two things. The first thing with our initiative, as I said, the Ocean 12, really this coordination efforts among government agencies is really, really important. It's something that we focus on because if we don't have this integration of ocean issues across government agencies, we won't be able to really progress anything that is related to first ensuring we have the sovereignty over our sea areas, and we really engage in nature conservation. And I also talked about the Ocean Flagship program that we have, where we want to focus on ocean science and community engagement. So we have also one component that is ocean governance. So it's about laws. We work on maritime boundaries to secure our maritime boundaries. And so one of the things is even when we have these three components, we don't really work across them. So it's separate processes. So for example, if we have community engagement, it's more with NGOs engaging with communities, but it's not directly the government. Ocean science, for example, is almost inexistent. We don't develop really the ocean science we need here. And it's something that if really we want to progress ocean governance, we need to have the ocean science here. So we need to attract some ocean scientists and develop the ocean science we need here to guide our decision. So it's something that, so this is about ocean governance. The second thing is more on maritime side. It's really, it is the theme of the seminar today, is navigation with care. We absolutely need to develop our maritime infrastructure. We need to develop hydrography. We need to develop H2 navigation. And we also, and it was said by Krista, she was talking about ballast water management. We also need to accede to all the conventions that give us the strength to impose measures on foreign vessels coming here. In Solomon Islands, we have 600 to 700 foreign vessels coming every year. So it's a lot, and it's a lot of risk. Some of the vessels coming, they don't go in other countries like Australia and New Zealand because they are not in condition, but they come into Solomon Islands. So we are now in the process where we are acceding to the Ballast Water Convention. We have acceded to the Annex 6 to MARPOL Convention to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from ships. And so we are in the last 2 years, we have acceded to 10 conventions. We put the regulation in place, and we build our capacity to control the vessels. So navigation with care is also that, is to ensure the compliance of vessels coming to us and compliance of our vessels here in Solomon Islands. So we also engage with the maritime industry here, working with our domestic ship operators, training our seafarers. So it's a lot of initiative, and we need partners to help us because, of course, resources and capacity are limited in Solomon Islands. So it's something that, yeah, we try to engage with partners. So, for example, it's an opportunity for me to thank IFAN, because IFAN, through the Pacific Community, SPC, it's our result technical organization, has built our capacity to install and maintain aids to navigation. It's really coming from IFAN through SPC. My specialist of aids to navigation is connected this morning, Patrick, and all of this is coming from partnership. And so we really need some partners to come and help in everything that I've talked about with is ocean governance. Thank you.
No, that's amazing. And just to give a little background there. So IFAN, the International Foundation for AIDS to Navigation, their mission is to help boaters, mariners, and coastal communities protect sensitive marine ecosystems, through safer, smarter navigation. And it was through their partnership, with us at the Living Oceans Foundation that we were able to become an official UN Ocean Decade activity. And we're incredibly grateful for that. And I think highlighting, the importance of the education and the campaigns that, again, highlight, why it's important not only to protect boaters and boater property, being the vessels that they operate, but also the ecosystems that they very much are very, they enjoy being on the reefs. They enjoy being in the mangroves and the seagrasses. These are really important points, and we're incredibly grateful to be partnering with IFAN, particularly for not only this webinar, but for the subsequent webinars and for the entire Navigate with Care campaign. So thank you so much there for highlighting that. We're gonna bump over to the Q&A section here. Let's see, I have one. Oh, I have one for Krista. How do you in the Bahamas strike the right balance between using these resources through boating, fishing, and tourism to ensuring their protection? I think what they're asking is, how can aids to navigation, really help with boating, fishing, and tourism to ensure the long-term protection of these vital ecosystems?
Thanks. That's a good question. Well, as a coastal nation, we're an archipelago in the Bahamas, for those of you that don't know. So we have about 30 main islands, but there are over 702,000 keys that are spread out. So navigating by water is kind of key for us to get from one place to the next. And so having these aids, I think, is really critical, especially in areas where you're not familiar. In some instances, the reef is just below the surface of the water. We don't necessarily have those. And if you're not working with a local guide, it can put you in a really tricky or dangerous situation where you run aground and need to call for help. But you're right, it is a balance. And it's difficult. Thierry touched on some of the governance issues and challenges that we're all struggling with, but it's in everyone's best interest that we have really healthy, robust ecosystem so that they can provide all the benefits that we talked about earlier in the call. So I think that's a work in progress, but we have a long history of being on the water, using and accessing the water to benefit the communities that have lived here historically and currently today, but also to support tourism and also to support fishers. So I think that's something that will continue, and as more information becomes available and technology allows, we can keep innovating and improving regulations and things like that. So we're doing the best job that we can to help people move around safely, but also to help protect species and the ecosystems that they live in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Krista. No, that was a great response. And it really is a partnership between these three entities to ensure that all are on board, for lack of a better word, to ensure that, not only boaters are safe, that they're able to enjoy the ecosystems, but that, more often than not, it's not necessarily communicated very well, across several different sects, right? And so I think that leads up really nicely to our next question. That's really for the panel, and we'll go in the order, for Ian, Krista, Julia, and Thierry, just giving your thoughts here. Across very different regions, from the Caribbean, where Krista works, East Africa with Juliet, and the Pacific, which of course Terry and Ian, you each work with, coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass meadows at some point. What common threads do you see, and how these ecosystems support communities and economies, which I think we already touched on. But in a broader question, how can we communicate their value more effectively to the broader public and policymakers? I think that's the one I really want to focus on. So thank you, Ian, to start us off.
Thank you. So seagrass meadows, mangrove forests, and coral reefs are all ecosystem engineers. So these are the sets of species that build the entire ecosystem, the entire habitat, which then provides the support for all the other species, make up that massive biodiversity. And these are some of the most critical habitats for us as humans, even being selfish. We talked about the ecosystem services of but coral reefs, but seagrass and mangroves also have absolutely critical roles as nurseries for some of the fish we like to catch, protecting our coastlines. Mangroves have a really important role to play there as well. I think a really large step that's becoming, I think, more recognized and more common now is starting to value nature. We've had a habit in the past of only placing value on things that are built, built infrastructure, artificial things which humans have built. But nature provides us with the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food that we eat. And as we start to value that, we can make better decisions. And so there's been more and more work to actually put dollar values on this natural infrastructure or these habitats provided by these ecosystem engineers. And I think that's really important, because then you can make actual informed evidence-based decisions. You're not ignoring the elephant in the room, which is that nature is providing all this stuff, and once we lose it, gosh, we're really going to miss it, because it's not just the fact that we've lost a beautiful ecosystem like behind us, but man, we're animals as well. We need all these things to survive. And so I think that starting to bring nature into economics, into decision making, into political decisions is absolutely vital. And I think that's something that's going to, unfortunately, that's often the language of decision makers. Sometimes biodiversity or beauty doesn't resonate as much. So I think that's going to be a really important movement. And things like biodiversity credits, which are a little bit like a carbon credit, could be a part of that way to start valuing and then paying for the maintenance of these ecosystems.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ian. Krista, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Ian 100%. And just to build on that, I think people need to recognize, it would be helpful if people recognize the value. Yes, these ecosystems are incredibly important. And in some instances, the man-made replicas don't do as good a job. And so when we lose that because we decide to rip up a wetland or a mangrove to put coastal infrastructure there, we are more vulnerable in the future to storms and things that are happening and going to increase. So just it's difficult with balancing all of these trade-offs and thinking about long-term, what's in the best interest of our country and communities versus some of these short-term economic wins. And that is a challenge for political reasons as well. But I think in addition to communicating the value, I think as scientists, we're often really fascinated and curious about the ecosystems, the animals, and things like that themselves, just because innately that's what we're curious in. But really making sure that we translate the applied nature of the work that we do so people understand the connections to their day-to-day lives, like Ian talked about, for your food, for your health, for your livelihoods. We need these ecosystems, and the better intact they are, the better our chances of survival, short-term and long-term are. So I think that's what we need to continue to work on, is to make those connections more tangible and relevant, and have people think about more long-term versus short-term.
Amazing. No, absolutely. Thank you so much. And a lot of those, both of your comments are kind of why this campaign, is resonating, I think, so well. Julia, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I'll also focus on the communication bit because we had a recent situation where one of the policymakers said that our institute soaked in like $1 million and we were just counting fish. And it was like, how can you just use all that money counting fish? And we were doing the counting of fish using hydroacoustics in the deep sea, because now they are starting to escalate blue economy initiatives. And they say there's so much fish offshore. Most fishers fish here near shore. There's so much fish offshore. Let's go out there, get them. And for us as a responsibility, we have to tell them what's exactly there. You can't just go there because you see schools of fish migrating in one season and say there's so much. So we soaked in a lot of money, but so that we can provide policy directions on how much is out there, how much should we invest in getting what's out there. But then because we did not communicate it well, it was like we were counting fish. So we are also trying to put a strategy on our communication style so that it can inform the policymakers for, yes, so that would be my quick reaction on the communication.
No, thank you so much. That's a very good real-time example of why it's important to have these communicated properly. Terry, please, your final thoughts here.
Yeah, thank you. Just because you were talking about threats, I just wanted to elaborate on the threats to our ecosystems. We have air environments we experience. The first one is derelict vessels and wrecks. Unfortunately, our ship operators often don't have the capacity and buy all ships, and when they stop operations, the ships are left here around. So we have hundreds of derelict vessels and wrecks around. It also happens with some foreign operators and investors when they're involved in mining and logging here. They import all vessels, and when they stop operation, they leave their vessels here because it's not worth exporting the vessels. And we have the threats of wrecks here all around. And the second threat is pollution, the risk of pollution. We need a lot of education with our small boat operators, with the maritime industry, to prevent pollution from plastics and from oil. It's something that we need. So it's why we have this community engagement, and we work with the maritime industry to prevent pollution. So they are the two things we need to address. May I just, because we are reaching the end of the seminar, I'm really a believer in marine protected areas. And because, marine protected areas have different level of management, it's a good way of reconciling the competing demands, also engaging with communities for them to participate to conservation, and for government agencies to put in place rules, install EST navigation, develop the science in this area. So it's something that I would promote. I'm advocating here in Solomon Islands. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we, as Thierry mentioned, it is so important to highlight all the different threats that boaters and mariners and just in general, interacting with these ecosystems, but also that that boaters are can be their strongest ally. And as you all highlighted, collaboration between mariners and scientists and policymakers and local communities is so key. And with that, I want to thank our panelists so very much for giving your insight and your expertise on this matter. And I really appreciate your participation here with our Navigate with Care webinar, Reefs Are Nature's Ally. And as just, I know we're running a bit over, but just I think there's been a link in the chat here that to add in to take the pledge, the Navigate with Care with pledge, to ensure that you will adhere to the aids to navigation, and that you're able to spread the word about the importance of ensuring that boaters, mariners, etc., are all paying attention to these incredibly important resources to not only protect yourselves as mariners, but also to protect the ecosystems. And again, I really want to thank our panelists for joining today, and I really want to thank all of the people that have joined this webinar. And please check out the chat for further resources. I know there were a couple questions we weren't able to get to, but hopefully there's enough information there in the chat to be able to connect with and give some more background. And again, please share this recording when it comes out to not only your colleagues, but to family, friends, etc., who are mariners or not, who are just interested in marine life and the importance that the marine ecosystems have for us. And again, thank you all very much. This webinar has been recorded and will be publicly available. And again, I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in today. And we're hopeful that perhaps we can, continue to make some behavioral changes and to ensure that our coastal ecosystems that are so fragile yet so imperative for not only a resilient coastal communities, but also for the larger good. So again, thank you all so much, both the panelists and group, for joining. Thank you all very much. Thank you.